It's time for HopeFilled Financial FootStep number 3, Get Out of Debt. To kick off today's episode for the story, we're going to be reacting to Rob Berger's Get Out of Debt story. Rob is a very respectable financial content creator whom I appreciate significantly. And Rob's story is going to play perfectly into today's main topic, which will be HopeFilled Financial FootStep number 3. Today is a must listen if you're trying to get out of debt. Good morning and welcome to the HopeFilled Financial Podcast. My name is Jay Disberger, your one and only HopeFilled Financial Coach, and I'm happy that you're here with us today. Before we jump into today's story, I have one thing I got to tell you. I was recently honored to be invited to be a guest on Ed Jarecki's podcast, Elevate Your Business. I'm going to link the episode down below if you're curious about our conversation about success in entrepreneurship. And Ed, if you see this, thank you so much for inviting me on your show. Today's episode is all about getting out of debt, and I can't think of a more appropriate way than to review an outstanding and inspiring story from someone I respect and how they got out of debt. This is Rob Berger's video about his personal getting out of debt free story. This video can be found on Rob's YouTube channel. It's called How to Finally Get Out of Debt, 7 Steps to Debt Freedom. Now, for brevity and out of respect for Rob's content, I'm not going to share the whole video here with you. We're going to react to the chunks that are most relevant to the main topic. So if you find these bits and pieces of Rob's story helpful to you and you want to hear more, you can check out his video in the link below. Without further delay, let's jump in.
You cannot have financial freedom when you're drowning in debt. And I can tell you that from firsthand experience. I'm going to walk through in today's video the exact 7 steps that I took to get out of debt. And we're talking, I hate to say this, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. It wasn't like I had, a $2,000 credit card. I had student loans. My wife had student loans. We had car loans, and we had a pretty massive home equity line of credit. All of that was in addition to our mortgage. And so here's the deal. One day, I was in our basement, and I was listening to the Dave Ramsey show. And I don't really listen to the Dave Ramsey show that often. But if you've listened to a show, you know that folks call in and they scream or yell that they're debt-free.
First and foremost, that's a lot of debt. I think it's inspiring and hope-filled that someone I respect so much in the personal financial space is willing to share their story of having dug into so much debt. Share that story so that you can learn from it, so that you can benefit from it. Now, Rob mentioned having listened to the Dave Ramsey show, and that's where he found his inspiration. I think that is where Dave Ramsey shines the most in the personal financial space, inspiring people to become debt-free, and doing so by featuring those debt-free screams on his show. Now, I know for those of you who are past getting out of debt, the debt-free screams on the Dave Ramsey show may be the part that you skip over, as they may start to feel redundant and they don't feel relevant to what you're listening to. But for someone who is buried in debt, those debt-free screams and the stories behind them can be the inspiration that you need to jumpstart your journey. That's what happened for Rob, and it might be what can happen for you.
I want to be that person. Now, I've never called into the Dave Ramsey show, but I wanted to be debt-free. And in fact, let me show you this. You probably can't read it. I'll read it to you. This is a note that I wrote to myself that day. I mean, I'm listening to the Dave Ramsey show. I'm sick of all the debt we're in. I'm hearing all these people calling and screaming that they're debt-free. So here's what I wrote, June 15th, 2005. I even put the time. It was 6:31 p.m. And I said, I will be totally debt-free by June 15th, 2012. I gave myself 7 years. And I even underlined totally, because in my mind, I included the mortgage. And guess what? We failed, right? June 15th, 2012, we weren't totally debt-free, but we were on our way.
Oddly enough, that ties directly into my definition of success that I mentioned on the Elevate Your Business podcast. I largely think of success as a state of being, as something that can be a decision. Someone who is successful is someone who fails, and fails a lot. They just learn from their success, and they grow onward and upward. They stand on a pile of failures, significantly more failures than someone who identifies as a failure, someone who is burdened by their failures, someone who sits at the bottom of their pile of failures, feeling crushed by them. To identify as a success is to move past your failures, not let them weigh you down, and let them motivate you to be successful. Again, success is a state of being, and that can be true in your getting out of debt journey.
When we're presented with ideas to accomplish something, particularly in the world of finance, immediately we can come up with, if you're like me, a dozen reasons why it won't work. That won't work because of this reason or that reason. And what I want to encourage you to do as we go through the 7 steps is to at least keep an open mind and ask, okay, yeah, it seems impossible for me to sell my car, but what if I did? Now, as you do that, you may conclude after you've given it a lot of thought and walked through these what if questions, yeah, I can't sell my car. That's not a good decision, but you shouldn't immediately object to it. Keep an open mind. Ask, what if? Well, what if I did that? Well, these 3 problems would be created. All right, well, how might I solve those problems?
This what if mentality, in my opinion, is something that can be very helpful when you're brainstorming anything. It can help you get out of a rut if you feel stuck or you feel like you are trapped by debt. Considering things that feel almost taboo, like selling a car or selling a home to change your circumstances, can be a key to you finding how to be financially free.
Maybe the most obvious, but it's one that I see skipped over a lot, and that is you got to say no to any new debt. If we go back to June 2005, I'd made this commitment, I'd written it down, and wouldn't you know, we're out shopping for some furniture, and what do they offer us but 0% financing for 12 months? And at first I thought, well, that makes sense. I can keep the money in a savings account, earn a little bit of interest. It won't cost me anything. I started to justify the new debt. And then I remembered my commitment that I had written down. I said, I'm not going to go into more debt, even if it seems like a good deal. One of the reasons was that I was afraid it would cause us to spend more on furniture than we otherwise would. When you've got to actually take the money out of the bank, out of the checking account or out of the savings account and spend it, it hurts. It hurts a lot. And it affects how you spend your money.
And that's something that Dave Ramsey talks about. And Dave Ramsey is right on the money when it comes to that point. And we talk about that in HopeFilled Financial FootStep number 2. If you didn't see the episode that covers taking control, we're going to go ahead and make sure that's linked below too. But getting out of debt is more than just a process. It's more than a series of steps to say, here's where I am, I'm going to be debt free. We got to commit to the bit and not add any more debt to the pile, even when the debt seems like a good idea. 0% down financing with 0% interest for an introductory period is simply a gateway drug into a debt is good mentality when it comes to consumption. And Rob's exactly right. When you have that mentality, you end up consuming more than you otherwise would. Now I'm going to reiterate this in the main topic, but when you think of debt, I want you to be thinking about it representing a promise that you are committing your time to work to pay that debt off. You're not only just committing that time to pay off the debt that is outstanding, but you're also committing the time to pay for the interest in order to pay for the privilege to have debt. You are promising your future away so that you no longer have a decision with your time in the future. You have to go to work because you have to, not because you want to.
So step 1 is you've got to say no to any and all new debt. Now, that may mean you have to take some radical steps. Maybe you have to cut up your credit cards. I'm not sure I'd close the accounts necessarily. That could hurt your credit score. But you may need to cut them up so that you don't use them, or at least put them away so you're not carrying them around and can be tempted to use them.
For example, take your credit cards, pop them in a Tupperware, fill it with a little water, stick it in the freezer. That ice block will give you enough friction between you and your credit card to prevent you from using it if you're not willing to cut them up.
The other thing you've got to do is understand where your money is going. Now, they call that budgeting, and a lot of people don't like that word. That's fine. Call it whatever you want. Call it your debt freedom spreadsheet or something a little more positive. But you have to understand where your money is going. There are plenty of free tools you can use to do that.
Rob is exactly right. In order to get out of debt, we need to have a written plan for our money, a written plan that is actionable, that is practical, that is frugal. We need to have a written plan that we can believe in. And this actually reminds me of one of my favorite quotes of all time that's attributed to Pablo Picasso. Our goals can only be reached through the vehicle of a plan in which we must fervently believe and upon which we must vigorously act. There is no other route to success.
Step 2, pretty straightforward, but you need to understand the debt that you have. I've talked to a lot of people, and I'll ask them, what's the interest rate on that debt you have? And they don't know. And I'll ask them, well, what's the balance on it? How much do you still owe? And they're not sure about that either.
You may very well right now be facing a fear of your debt, a fear of money in general. You don't want to look at what you have. It can be very valuable and a good first step to paying off your debt to simply go through your accounts, go through the balances, go through the interest rates, write them down in a list. Believe me, it's not only going to help you emotionally to face that fear, it's going to be something you need to practically do in order to follow the next steps.
Get rid of any debts that we can. And oftentimes that is from selling something associated with the debt. The most frequent common example of that is a car. And again, this is where a lot of objections can be raised. And I get that. But we need to ask, if you owe, say, 20 grand on a car and you're trying to get out of debt and you've got credit card debt and medical debt and other things as well, you can put a serious dent in your debt by selling that car.
Now, doesn't Rob just sort of sound like Dave Ramsey as he's talking about selling the car? Back when I used to listen to the Dave Ramsey show more often, there was a joke that was made that half the calls could have the solution, well, you gotta sell the car in order to make progress. Dave needs a button on his desk to push that says, sell the car, sell the car, sell. But seriously though, if you're trying to get out of debt, it can be very healthy to consider selling a large item like a car, whether you owe money on it or not.
In our case, we had a car we didn't owe anything on, but we didn't need it. I loved that car. I have to be honest with you. It was an Acura. It was back in early 2000s. I loved that car. But you know what? I didn't love it as much as our debt, getting rid of our debt. So I sold the car, took the money, and paid down debt. And the question is always, is the thing that you own more important to you than reducing your debt? So step 3 is getting rid of as much debt as you can almost instantly by either selling something associated with the debt or other stuff that you simply don't need that can help you pay down your debt faster.
This is a good time to remind you of the endowment effect. If you didn't already own the thing that you're thinking about selling, while you're in the situation you are with a lot of debt, would you go out and buy that thing? Or would you go out and borrow money to buy that thing?
Number 4, step 4 of 7 steps is you want to lower your interest rates where you can. And this goes back to the list of all of your loans. One of the things I had you write down was the interest rate that you're paying on all of the loans. And you want to go loan by loan and ask, can I somehow lower the interest rate on this loan?
Well, this is very good advice. I want to give you a warning. Just because you are able to move a debt from something that's higher interest to something that's lower interest, or something that has the interest deferred for an introductory period, doesn't mean that you've actually made progress.
Step 5 is increase your income. Now, I know that's sort of an easy thing to say, but this can supercharge your debt pay down. And I'm going to show you a specific example. Some of the things I've done in the past, you get a second job, or some of you with 2 jobs, you get a third job. Even a relatively small amount of extra income can go a long way to paying off your debt. I want to give you a specific example, and this one is with a side hustle.
Just to encourage you, if you're a little resistant to the idea of going out there and working harder to pay off your debt with a second job or a side hustle, it can be very, very helpful. As Rob says, it supercharges your get out of debt journey. But that's only true if you have a written plan where all the money you're generating through that side hustle or that extra job goes towards getting rid of your debt. Additionally, you need to tell yourself that this extra work that you're pushing forward right now is temporary. If you can, in a written plan, calculate how long you need to push in order to get your debt out the door and accept this extra work for what it is, temporary, you may emotionally be able to accept this strategy is more viable than otherwise.
Number 6 is reduce your expenses. Now, I know that's sort of an easy thing to say, but I want to give you a specific strategy. But are there ways to save money without changing our lifestyle? I ended up calling these painless ways to save money, and it actually led to something that I call the money audit. And it's really simple. What we do is we go through all of our monthly bills. So this isn't, shopping for groceries or clothes, but the actual monthly bills. So this would include gym memberships, all our streaming services, any insurance that we have, of course, rent and mortgage, all of the loan payments. But list all of our monthly bills. And I go down through them one by one, and I ask basically 2 questions. Do I need it? If we have 5 streaming services, can I get rid of 3 or 4 or 5 of them? Do I really need all of them? Do I really need that gym membership?
I want to highlight one thing that's very important here. What Rob is talking about is the difference between your wants and your needs. And I love that he highlights that there are painless wants that may be taking our money away right now, like subscriptions that we don't use, be it for a gym membership or a streaming service, or maybe there's an insurance product that we have that's completely redundant to what we need. I made a full episode about that as well that I'll link in the description. And that's why I included doing a review of your insurance situation in HopeFilled Financial FootStep number 2, so you could cut down your expenses where they're not needed, or if you're currently not deferring the risk that you need to defer, you can throw it in there now, as once you start getting a plan to get rid of risk in your life, Murphy can come knocking at your door. But essentially, what we need to consider here is something called the gap. I'll reiterate it in the main topic, but the gap is the difference between your income, what you're bringing home every month, and the total amount of your expenses. These expenses should include the minimum payments on all your debts and your 4 walls: shelter, transportation, utilities, and food. Oh, and in those needs, you're also going to need to include insurance because it protects your 4 walls. You add those up with your minimum debt payments, subtract it from your income. That gives you the gap. That is what you have to work with to pay down your debt. And the bigger you can make that gap by either reducing your expenses or increasing your income, the faster you can get through your debt payoff journey.
You very well may choose to keep some or all of them. That's fine, but you should at least ask the question through each monthly bill, do I really need this? Is it as important to me as getting out of debt? You have to make that decision for yourself. I can't make it, but that's exactly what we did. Our seventh and final step is really, really critical, and it's that you need to use the debt snowball method.
I'm so glad that Rob brought up the debt snowball. That's what we're going to be talking about in today's main topic.
Among the subjects that people like to talk about, debt ranks right between toenail fungus and other people's dreams. Your brain just doesn't want to hear it. And that emotional reaction is partly why it's so hard to pay it off.
And even if you don't want to hear today's main topic, because there's hope, you might want to stick around. What we're going to be going through today is a comprehensive review of HopeFilled Financial FootStep number 3. We're going to be talking about how to get out of consumer debt for good. Now, we just left the story with Rob Berger when he mentioned a strategy known as the debt snowball. So I can't think of a more appropriate way to start the main topic than going over the two most mainstream approaches or strategies to pay off debt. And I can't do a better job than the PBS-sponsored show 2 Cents in their episode, What's the Fastest Way to Pay Off Your Debt?
If you asked a mathematician how to structure your debt, they'd probably recommend something like the avalanche approach. You list your debts by interest rates, with the highest at the top and the lowest at the bottom. You pay minimums on everything except the loan with the highest interest rate, which gets the biggest part of your gap. Once that one's paid off, you use the increased cash flow to move down the hillside like an avalanche. By the time you get to the bottom, you save the most money because you paid as little interest as possible.
So that was the avalanche method. And according to 2 Cents, it's mathematically the most effective way to pay off your debt while minimizing the amount of interest that you will pay throughout that journey. But let's consider a scenario where your largest debt is the one with the highest interest rate. While it might be mathematically logical to tackle it, it's going to take you a long time before you get your first debt knocked off. And it can be very discouraging if your first victory is 1, 2 or more years down the road. And that's why statistically, people who followed the avalanche method on average across the board do not finish their debt payoff journey as much as those who use this next method.
Turns out the same mind control techniques found in video games can work with your finances. Game designers strategically dole out positive reinforcements, clearing a board of gems, upgrading your loot, which floods your brain with pleasurable dopamine and keeps you playing. At first, these rewards are handed out easily and often to get you hooked, and then more spaced out and difficult as time goes by.
I've talked about this before and how specifically Angry Birds implements this approach very, very effectively to get you addicted to their game.
It's really effective and a little bit evil, but the same brain hacking technique can be used to pay off your debt. It's called the snowball method. Instead of listing your debts by interest rate, you list them by balance. Like the avalanche approach, you pay minimums on all of them, except you focus your firepower on the smallest balance. Once that's wiped out, you roll the extra cash down the hill to the next highest balance, and so on and so on. The snowball method ensures you easy victories early on to keep you motivated.
That makes a lot of sense, and despite my disagreements that I have with Dave Ramsey, this is a topic where I really do fully and wholly agree with him. And this goes beyond just a matter of opinion. The effectiveness of the snowball is backed up by academic research. What I have in front of me here is a New York Times article that's entitled, "To Get Out of Debt, It May Help to Think Small." This article cites that the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University conducted a study. They crunched the data on paying off debt, and what they found was what I have highlighted here. People with large amounts of debt are more likely to succeed in paying down their entire debt if they attack the account with the smallest balance. First, that is. Even though that approach might end up costing them extra money in interest over the long haul, it's because they say maintaining motivation to eliminate debts over a long time horizon might necessitate small wins along the way, or as 2 Cents put it, small wins at the beginning that are easy to acquire, and then spacing out the victories more and more as you go through the process in time. In the same way you can get addicted to a little mobile app, you can get addicted to paying off your debt and finishing this HopeFilled Financial FootStep. Now that we understand the strategy, the debt snowball for HopeFilled Financial FootStep number 3, let's consider an example. We're going to use it as a touchstone to not only better understand the snowball, but also to understand exceptions to the snowball. While we've seen that the snowball may be the most effective method to make sure that you get to the end of your debt payoff journey successfully, there are circumstances that pop up that mean that we need to bend the rules of the snowball a little bit, which means that the snowball isn't as much the law of the land as it is
guidelines.
So what I have in front of me now is a debt payoff calculator that I built in Excel with an example where there are 8 debts that need to be paid off. In this particular example, we have a gap, if you will, that includes the minimum payments. So the total amount of money that's going to be going to debt every month of $1,600.66. We'll say $1,600 just to make it easy. Above the minimum payments, though, we only have $175 that we can throw at the debt. So this is an example where the little bit of gap that you can put towards that smallest debt on the top of the snowball is relatively small because, in this example, we have $64,733 in debt. Let's go down the kind of debts that there are. There's a buy now, pay later debt. This is $950. There's a car loan for $18,500. There are 3 credit cards in order. One of them is $650. Right, that's a little one. There's one for $2,283. There's another one for $2,850. Next, there's an IRS debt. And in this example, you should know that the IRS debt is currently subject to a payment plan. That's going to be $7,500. There's a personal loan for $7,000 and the coup de grace, the big whopper at the bottom, a student loan of $25,000. Now, before we sort these from smallest balance to largest balance, let's go ahead and sort them from highest interest rate to lowest interest rate in order to see what the most optimal solution would be if we didn't do anything other than just straight up follow the debt avalanche method. As you can imagine, the credit cards are the highest interest rates. Credit card number 2 has a 29% interest rate. Credit card number 3, 21%. The buy now, pay later is actually listed at 15 in this example, and credit card 1 is relatively nice with a 14% interest rate. The personal loan is 13%, IRS and student loan are both at 7, and the car loan is 6. Are these realistic for the time and day that you're listening to this? Maybe, maybe not. It's an example. So if we list everything from highest interest rate to lowest interest rate, we see that there's going to be 47 months to pay all this off. That's how long it's going to take. And the total interest paid for this example is $10,434. Remember that number as we check out the snowball method. In sorting these from smallest balance to largest balance and paying them off in that order, we take 48 months to pay off the debt. So we're only adding one more month to our debt payoff journey by using the snowball instead of the avalanche, and our total interest paid using this approach is $10,714. Okay, so think about it as choosing a method where we're more likely to finish the journey, more likely to actually achieve debt freedom worth $280 and 1 month of your life for this particular example. Because if it is, then the snowball should be a no-brainer. All right, we've got an example for the debt snowball. It's pretty clean. We're following it to a T, but there are some exceptions, as mentioned before, that we should consider. What I'm going to share with you now is a small snip of a highlight from the Dave Ramsey show entitled, I owe the IRS $60,000. What should I do? The poor lady who called in is trying to work a debt snowball, and it came up that she owes the IRS almost $60,000. And Dave had this to say.
Because you made the taxes due when you filed it. They weren't due until, it'd be next week anyway, but, geez. Well, your penalties and interest on that 16 are going to be mammoth. I generally put the IRS at the top of the list. In this case, I'd put the 16 IRS at the top of your debt snowball, and I would attack it with a vengeance. And let's get rid of it before it starts getting, if you can get that cleared up within 90 days, and you should be able to by putting this 6 towards it, or 7 towards it, then you get that out of your life. Then we'll go and knock out the car. Then we'll go and knock out the last IRS one because you've got it on a payment plan. But you're getting hammered by these people with penalties and with taxes. So we generally put the IRS at the top. In this case, I would put the 16 at the top because, as you said, the urgency.
And the thing is, and Dave is largely right about this, the IRS has the power to completely ruin your life. And if you get the IRS mad when it comes to paying off your debt, you can end up in a whole bunch of trouble if you don't make them the priority. So it can be advantageous to move them up the list, but I don't agree that it's the right decision to put them at the top of the list in every circumstance. Every circumstance is different. Let's go back to our snowball example and see what happens if we put the IRS at the very top of the list. I'm going to go ahead and in the first column list it as a 0 and then sort in order of priority. Now, what we have here is the debt snowball, but we've moved the IRS from where it was all the way up to the top. We've added an extra month now. It takes 49 months with this plan to get all the debt paid off. But we've added a lot of interest to the story here. In total, with this plan, with the IRS at the top, you will pay a total of $12,249 in interest. That's significantly more than $280. And here's the thing that I really want to point out. It takes 24 months to get the IRS paid off with this particular example. You owe $7,500 to the IRS. The minimum payment on the payment plan is $160. If you are a little more than doubling your payment to the IRS, you knock them out, in this example, in 2 years. It takes 2 years to get your first win. And in this example, we have two small debts that are less than $1,000. Is it really going to take that much longer to pay off the IRS if we put them first? If I go back and I now make the IRS priority number 3 so that we pay off credit card 1, the $650 debt, and then the buy now, pay later next, the $950 debt, before getting to the IRS, what you find is the IRS still gets paid off in 25 months, but we get the first debt out of the way in 4 months, the second debt out of the way in 7 months, and we've reduced the total amount of interest that we're paying down to $12,080. Now, the highest interest debt that's in this list is the one that comes right after the IRS, and by paying the IRS off first, we're really racking up the serious interest with it. So what if we swap the IRS and, credit card number 2? If we do that, it takes now 29 months to pay off the IRS. 29 months. So originally, if we put them at the top, it takes 24. If we put the two little debts in this example ahead of them, it takes 25. If we put the two littlest debts and then the highest interest credit card ahead of it, which was $2,283 for the balance, let me remind you, we're going to pay them off in 29 months. So 5 months longer, not even a half year. But it's still better than where they were in the original snowball, which was 37 months. Now, putting the IRS up in the snowball a little bit as number 4, we're still paying off all the debt in 48 months. And we're now only paying $11,180 in interest over the span of this plan. So where do we put the IRS in this list? Well, it's ultimately going to depend on you and your situation and your circumstances. I think you need to answer that question for yourself. But this is a good example of considering some what-if scenarios. What if I put the IRS at the very top? What if I put some of the smaller debts ahead of it so that I can still fulfill the spirit of the debt snowball and not sacrifice the benefit that it gives me over the debt avalanche? If you're in HopeFilled Financial FootStep number 3, if you're trying to get out of debt, you have a debt that is an exception to the snowball, it's going to be very important for you to figure out where it should go in your snowball journey, if it needs to move up to the top, and what the trade-offs are for putting it at different levels. Now, note that I said that there are debts that are exceptions to the snowball. That's plural. There are multiple different exceptions. Other ones that I would put on the list where they need to move up, regardless of their balance, would be court-mandated debt payments. If there's something that you need to pay off by law because you have a lien against you or the court said you had to, well, that should move up the list appropriately depending on the risk that's there with an associate, and that's typically a lot more than what a creditor is going to have leaning on you. Another exception in the opposite direction is a zombie debt. There is a thing called the statute of limitations when it comes to old debts that haven't gone to court. And these rules vary from state to state. I'm not going to dig into the nitty-gritty details, but the statute of limitations starts at the last time you made a payment on this old debt. So for example, imagine you owed a credit card bill, and that credit card bill goes into collections, and you don't pay it. You ignore it. It's a bother to you, and you just don't have the money. You continue to ignore it. It's a little debt. They're calling you. You still ignore it. Well, then they sell your debt to a debt collector, a third-party debt collector. The credit card no longer owns your debt. Someone else does. They're trying to collect from you. They're calling you even more than the credit card collector did, and you continue to ignore it. I am not recommending that you ignore this. When you've got debts and collections, the best thing you can do is be in constant communication with them. I'm talking now about a scenario where this has already happened. And this third-party debt collector has been trying for months, for years, to get you to pay, and you haven't paid them anything. They get past the statute of limitations. They can still ask you to pay, because the moment you make a payment, that statute of limitations timer resets. The reason why I don't recommend that you wait until the statute of limitations is a problem is that kind of path really trashes your credit. And in the case we're in here, we'll show this in the example, it might be better for you to maintain your credit throughout this process as best as possible and not go down a journey that trashes it and puts a black eye on your credit report from here on after, at least for the next few years. I digress. If you have something that's past the statute of limitations, they can no longer legally collect that from you. They just can't. Put it in its own snowball later. You might still want to settle with them, but you don't have to put it in the frontline snowball. It might be the smallest debt you owe, and you can ignore it so that you can focus on the other debts that are going to be more pressing. Now, this brings us to another interesting topic that I want to mention. If you have something that's gone into collections, first off, again, communication is key. You can tell them where they are in your debt snowball. You can say, I'm trying to make minimum payments on everything until you are next on the priority list. Then you're going to get my attention. And some of them may start asking, well, how do I get up on the list? How do I move up on the list? Well, the answer to that, if they're not otherwise an exception to the rule, is to have a lower balance. And perhaps they'll negotiate with you. You may have debts that you can settle for less than what you actually owe. If you do pursue something like that, only negotiate a settlement that you have cash for. So you can save up as part of your debt snowball if you're at a point where there's a debt that you want to negotiate with. Instead of paying it on the smallest debt, save it up, make an offer with them, negotiate with them. If you make a deal with them, though, make sure you get the deal in writing. It's not uncommon for a debt that is settled for less than what is actually owed to come back later and wake up, even if it wakes up as a zombie debt. And if it were to go to court, they're like, hey, we got this debt. According to the books, you still owe it, but you have a written record that you settled it. Well, you can take that to the court. That's a legal document that will prove that you made a deal. And without that written evidence of settlement, you might not have any recourse and may continue to owe more than what you thought you did. Okay, let's go back to my example. And for the sake of looking at this example moving forward, we're going to say that the IRS sits at priority level number 3 after the 2 little debts and still before the really high interest credit card. If we're looking at this debt payoff journey and we really want to be successful, it's advantageous to try to get through this journey in 2 years or less. Right now, we're slated to get out in 4 years. That's a long time. So what are some of the things that we can do to get out of debt faster? Well, one would be to go get an extra side hustle. Go get an extra job. Try to generate a little bit of extra money every month. Given that the main method is called the snowball method, I think it's appropriate to say that anything that you sprinkle on top of the snowball to make it roll faster is called a snowflake. So at the top of the spreadsheet, I have something called repeatable snowflakes. Let's say that you work extra and earn $400 a month. $400 a month doing extra work that you otherwise wouldn't do if you weren't trying to get out of debt. If we just throw that extra $400, we move from 48 months to pay everything off all the way down to 37. That helped, but it's not everything. What's something else we can do? Well, if our credit score is okay enough, we might be able to move some of those high interest credit cards over to a credit card that has an introductory interest rate of 0% for, say, the first few months. Maybe it's going to be long enough for us to get out. So hypothetically, with the IRS at priority level number 3, we have 2 really big high interest credit cards at 29% and 21% respectively. Let's say we moved each of them over to their own separate card that's at 0% interest for an introductory period. If I replace the 28 or the 29% with 0% and the 21% with 0%, I'm able to knock another month off the list, but I was able to knock out over $2,000 in interest that's being paid. We went from $8,323 in interest all the way down to $6,667 in interest. So you can see that while this helps save us money in the long run, it doesn't have as big of an impact on getting our debt payoff journey shortened as throwing extra money on the pile might in this particular example. Now let's consider something a little more extreme. Let's say we wanted to get rid of this car. In this case, we get rid of the car and it's upside down. We still owe $2,000 on it, hypothetically. So we replace the $18,500 with $2,000. If we do that, our debt payoff journey is now 26 months. But by changing that car down to $2,000, we change where it lives in the snowball. We're going to move it up to priority number 4. And if we do that, we're down now to $3,720 of interest paid over 26 months of trying to get out of debt. We're getting really, really close to being able to knock this thing out in 2 years or less. There's got to be something else that we can do, right? Now, don't get intimidated. I'm going to jump into the heart of my calculator. It's a little dynamic and it's confusing if you don't know the formulas. But we can see here on month 4 is when we start focusing on the IRS debt. Let's say on month 4, after you got rid of the 2 little guys, you decide that you are really committed to paying off debt and you want to move the needle a lot. You have something that's collectible, be it a collection of Star Wars action figures that are mint in the box, or maybe you have that motorcycle, or some furniture that is way more expensive than what you actually need and it's almost brand new. Let's say you sold $2,000 worth of stuff in month 4 on top of what you're already doing, working a side hustle and using what gap you have that's grown from paying off the 2 smaller debts. Now, while that only shortens our debt payoff journey down by another month, it shortens down how long it takes for us to get rid of the IRS by a lot. We now get rid of the IRS debt in only 7 months since starting the payoff journey. I hope that going through these hypotheticals with the example helps inspire you to take some actions as you work to reduce how much time you're going to be spending in HopeFilled Financial FootStep number 3. But before you go, I've got 2 more questions that you need to think about. One would be, is it worth doing a debt consolidation plan where you have a company that says they're going to reduce your overall interest rate and bundle all your debts up together so that they're nice, neat, organized, and simplified, less stressful for you? Well, knowing what we know now about the debt snowball, do you think that's a good idea? Do you think taking all your little debts that can be sorted from smallest to largest, where you start clearing out minimum payments that can be used to tackle the next biggest one and gamify the system, taking all those and bundling them together into one giant monster debt, do you think that's worth it? And do you think that's going to genuinely help you? That's not to say that refinancing particular debts can be useful, but I believe consolidating everything into one giant monster makes it look more intimidating and makes it less likely that you're going to be able to get out of debt. At the very least, it might prevent you from getting out of debt as quickly as you might otherwise be able to with the debt snowball. And here's the last thing. I didn't include a mortgage in this list. Dave Ramsey doesn't include a mortgage in his baby step number 2. It's excluded in footstep number 3. Why wouldn't a mortgage live in footstep number 3? Why can't we put that mortgage in this debt payoff journey? This may be an exercise for well after you're past HopeFilled Financial FootStep number 3, but if you sat down and you looked at where you'd financially be 20 years from now with a mortgage and having gotten through to footstep number 5 sooner than you otherwise would have had you put that mortgage into this footstep, you'll find that you're probably going to come out ahead not putting the mortgage in with the rest of these debts. And unlike consumer debts, the alternative to getting a mortgage, having a debt on your home, is renting, where you don't actually own the home. You don't have an asset that's appreciating, acting as a hedge against inflation. You don't have part of your rent payment going to building equity over time. In my opinion, and in Dave Ramsey's opinion, quite frankly, the step of paying down your mortgage, paying it off, is something that can happen later down the road. And it's probably going to be the most frugal thing for you to exclude paying your mortgage down as a part of your debt snowball. And depending on your circumstances, it may very well be the best way for you to achieve your hope-filled financial future. So until next week, until next Tuesday, budget bravely and enjoy your hope-filled financial future. And good luck getting out of debt.